I want to talk about two really important statistical concepts here in this video. One is correlation versus causation, and two is the importance of random assignment and what it actually accomplishes. So I want to do it in the form of a little personal story or personal experience here. I've really struggled with sleep the past few years, with being able to get high quality sleep, get enough sleep. A year or two ago, I purchased a Fitbit which tracks my sleep, not only the amount of sleep, but also the levels of sleep. So specifically what I want to focus on for this video is deep sleep. It tells me how long I'm spending in deep sleep per night. And so if we take a look at the data that I've collected, some of the data, I've collected all kinds of information, and you might be able to see that there. But what we're going to look at right here is screen time. So some nights before I go to bed, I'll play around on my phone or just watch some videos or whatever, but I'm doing something with the screen. Other nights I might be talking with my wife or reading or journaling or working or something like that. Well, working but without the screen, like working just with pen and paper. So I recorded these right here would be the nights where I did not do screen time in the half hour or hour before bedtime. That's what this 0 represents. So along the bottom is screen time. The 1 would be times where I did have screen open before I went to bed. So on the left side, the vertical axis here is how many minutes of deep sleep I got on any given night. So each one of these little dots is a single night. For example, this dot right here, you can see I got 85 minutes of deep sleep that night, and it's also in the 0 on the horizontal. It's a 0, meaning that I wasn't watching the screen on that particular night. Whereas, let's say this one right here, I was watching something. Here I'm not sorting out whether it was a comedy or texting someone, whatever the case, but I was doing something on the screen in the half hour, hour before bed, and this particular night I got 61 minutes of deep sleep. So when we look at this chart, what's the story we see? One thing that I see, and we haven't really talked about correlation yet in general, how to put a number to this, but even without talking about it, you can probably see a trend that these dots tend to be higher than these dots, higher in terms of the vertical axis there. In other words, on the nights when I didn't have screen time before I went to bed, I averaged, right, I tended to get more sleep, deep sleep, than on the nights when I did do some kind of screen time before bed. So that's one story, and that is certainly a trend that this chart would support. It would support the story that maybe the screen time is impacting my deep sleep, that it's has a bad effect on the amount of deep sleep that I get per night. However, this is a story that's a valid story, and this data does support that story. However, this data does not prove that story, at least not without knowing more about how these data were collected. If I would just, and in this case I think I did this, I would just kind of make note each night, okay, yeah, I did screen time, had some caffeine, I'm wearing my mouth guard tonight, and I was just kind of making observations, and then I collected the data. This is called an observational study. I'm just observing what's naturally happening each day, each night, and then recording the data. If I did an observational study like this, then this is really just a correlation. The story that I told, that the screen time has a negative impact on my deep sleep, that's too strong. To say that it has a negative impact is not proven or supported by this data. What this data shows is, on average, the nights when I did have screen time, I did on average have lower amount of deep sleep than the nights when I didn't have sleep. it is true that we see that trend, and we can say correlated, associated with. We might say the more screen time I have, the less deep sleep I tend to have. That would be okay, but we can't say definitively here that screen time um, causes me to have less deep sleep per night. So there is a way to do that. Oh, and let me talk about why. First of all, it's important that we understand what lurking variables are. So lurking variables are the things that stand in the way of a correlation, a trend that we see, and causation, an actual claim that this thing is causing the other thing, that screen time is causing less deep sleep. That's a pretty strong claim, and in between there are lurking variables. So what does that mean? It means other variables that might also be explaining this story. For example, the nights when I don't have screen time are nights when I tend to be less stressed. If I'm just hanging around talking to my wife, or I'm doing some journaling, or something more casual, it's probably on a night when I wasn't very stressed anyway. When I go to screen time, a lot of times I do that to try to like unwind my anxiety about something or stress, or my brain is just moving too fast and I'm trying to slow it down. So I might intentionally watch a comedy to see if I can calm my brain down a little bit. So it could be that the stress happens to line up with the nights that I watch the screen, and the stress itself is what's actually causing me to get less deep sleep. I mean, it certainly makes sense that on a night when I'm very anxious or stressed that I might get less deep sleep there. So stress would be what's called a lurking variable. That's another possibility. We haven't proven that either. It could also be that on the nights that I do screen time, maybe I'm more likely to be eating snacks, whereas maybe these nights I'm less likely. And when I eat lots of snacks before I go to bed, maybe that decreases my amount of deep sleep. So snacks would be another possible lurking variable. So you have all these different kinds of lurking variables that basically mean these nights that I choose to watch screen time might be different in general than these nights when I'm not choosing screen time. So something other than the screen time itself could be causing that lower amount of sleep. So how do we deal with that? I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of lurking variables that could be explaining this relationship. Well, there is a nice way to handle this, and it's called random assignment. And what that means is in a typical study, I would get all my participants, and then I would maybe flip a coin or use a random number generator, but randomly assign half of them to one group, which might be some kind of treatment, and half of them to another group, which we call the control. In this case, my sample is made up of every night. Each one of my nights is an individual in my sample. And so what I could do is I could flip a coin every night, maybe an hour before I go to bed. And if it was heads, I force myself to watch screen time, no matter how I feel about that. Even if it's when I'm feeling really calm and I don't really feel a need for it, I do it anyway. Similarly, if I would get the other result, heads or tails or whatever the opposite of what I just said was, maybe I would not be allowed to do screen time. So what I would be doing is randomly assigning myself to either use screen time or not use screen time. And I'd have to be very sure that I could follow that coin flip if I was going to do this. But the benefit of that would be if I would then get data from my coin flips, I can be pretty sure that there's not another lurking variable. It's still possible. I can't say with 100% certainty, but I can be pretty confident if I see a relationship like this where one of the conditions is much better on average than another condition, that it's probably because of whatever I was flipping the coin about. So in this case, screen time. If I had collected this very same data here, but it was a result of coin flips, was determining whether I used the screen time, not whether or not I felt like using the screen time, then we could pretty certainly say that the screen time was actually causing my causing me to have less deep sleep. So random assignment, when you do that, it's called an experiment or a true experiment. That actually allows you to bridge that gap between correlation and causation. If you don't have that, if you only have observational data, and there's many cases where we only can have observational data, then it gets tricky. We have to start with a really strong correlation like this, but we have to somehow build up evidence that it's not one of those other lurking variables like snacking or stress or things like that. So maybe I would also measure those variables, and then I could kind of control for them, or there'd be other techniques, but it's not nearly as clean as a situation where you can randomly assign, because that random assignment is going to balance things out, almost everything else out, except for the screen time itself. So that's a little bit about correlation and causation. In summary, when you have observational data, when you have a correlation, you have to be careful not to jump to a conclusion and say that one thing is causing the other, because there could be lurking variables that are really what's causing that outcome. But you can get around this if it's possible to do random assignment with an experiment. Then you can actually get past those lurking variables and say, yes, probably this one thing is causing this other thing.